We're going to return now to the metadata retention bill that was introduced to Parliament today. The Shadow Communications Minister Jason Clare joins me now. Thank you for your time. This will be looked at by the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security. You are actually going to sit on that committee for this particular inquiry?
Yes, I am, David, as well as Mark Dreyfus, the Shadow Attorney General. It's important with legislation as complex and controversial as this that it's properly scrutinised. And it's broader than just national security. It affects people's privacy, anyone that has a phone or access to the internet, and also has potential cost implications as well. So we've said to the government today, this has been rushed in to the Parliament. It shouldn't be rushed out. We need to look at this over a couple of months, not over a couple of weeks. And that parliamentary committee should have myself on it as well as Mark Dreyfus.
And you would replace Tanya Plibersek and Penny Wong, is that right?
Well, probably Stephen Conroy, but we'll sort that out over the next few days.
And just on the timing,
just make sure that we've got the right people there to scrutinise this bill.
All right, just on the timing then, months rather than weeks, you're saying that you wouldn't report back, this committee wouldn't report back, and therefore the legislation couldn't be passed until next year.
Well, that's right. You know, this is important legislation, but it's not urgent. Police and other law enforcement agencies are not asking for new powers. They're asking to be able to retain access in the future to what they use now. Now, that gives us an opportunity to subject this legislation to proper scrutiny, and we can do that over the course of the next few months, and then the legislation can be debated by the Parliament next year. You've
heard the government today say that there will be clear exemptions for content such as subject line and content of emails, web browsing history, mobile phone tracking. None of that can be obtained without a warrant by authorities. Are you more comfortable because of that?
Well, the devil's in the detail. As you know better than most, when you start trying to explain what metadata is, you can get into a lot of trouble. George Brandis found that out at your expense. Malcolm Turnbull cleaned that up soon after, where he said it wouldn't involve web browsing, and he's made the point today in the Parliament that that's specifically excluded from this legislation. But the government has now developed a draft data set that they're going to ask a working group of law enforcement officials and industry officials to look at. It'll be important once they've done their work for the committee, the parliamentary committee, to have a good, hard, close look at that and make recommendations before the Parliament itself debates and votes on this legislation.
In your view, should authorities also be able to access this metadata when investigating internet piracy?
Well, it's a very good question. Piracy is an offence now, and a lot of people are doing it right now as we speak. The government has said they're interested in putting forward some reforms here to tackle and target this. I've said to the government they need to be very careful about the way they do that. People don't want to see their internet speeds slowed down, or they don't want to have their internet access shut off because of some legislation that's passed through the Parliament. The Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police made the point today that this legislation could give access to law enforcement officials to identify people that are pirating material. Malcolm Turnbull said, look, that's happening already, and the retention of that data won't be as important. But this is the sort of question that we need to pose to officials when the committee meets and asks the officials what this legislation will do.
Finally, can I also ask you about a separate piece of legislation, the one that George Brandis, the Attorney General, today signalled he'd insert an extra layer of protection on. This is what is now law to jail journalists up to 10 years if they report recklessly on special intelligence operations. The Attorney General now says he would have to approve any prosecution of a journalist. What do you think of that added safeguard?
Look, my view, David, is there should be arm's length between government and the prosecution of people. I don't like the idea of the Attorney General making that decision. Bill Shorten yesterday wrote to the Prime Minister and said, look, the better way to address this issue is to get the National Security Legislation Monitor to review this provision that was put in the first tranche of national security legislation. Brett Walker held that position until recently. The government's got to appoint a new monitor. I think that's the better way to go about this. No one's identified a proper legislative solution yet. This is a non-legislative solution that the government's recommended. I don't think they've got it right, and I think a review is the way to go about it.
Was it a mistake to pass that so quickly?
I'd say that the committee's done good work. There were concerns raised before and after this was passed. No one came up with a legislative solution. I think in the absence of a legislative solution, getting the monitor to go and interrogate this and come back with recommendations is the right way to go about it.
All right, Jason Clare, the Shadow Communications Minister, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, David.
We'll take a break.